There's this weird moment that happens sometimes when you sit down to write and suddenly it just doesn't work. You abandon it and you pick up the bottle because if you can't write like the greats, you might as well drink like them. But you can work it and avoid some of those problems that happen when you sit down to write.
And he plays the trombone.
Keep going.
And he only eats licorice.
Manny, this is solid gold.
His best friend is a panda.
No!
It was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed, with a brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world. The blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor, playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter, and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. Renting a typewriter at 10 cents a half hour in the basement of UCLA's Powell Library, Ray Bradbury spent $9.80 finishing the original manuscript for Fahrenheit 451 in 1953. But he didn't write a masterpiece in just the 49 hours he logged stroking keys. It all started as a spark in Ray Bradbury's eyes. We've all had this moment, a great idea that lights a fire in our bellies. And if you've ever failed to finish that story, the problem isn't a lack of inspiration.
If you only write when you're inspired, you may be a fairly decent poet, but you will never be a novelist because you're going to have to make your word count each day, and those words aren't going to wait for you whether you're inspired or not. So you have to write when you're not inspired.
Even a great idea needs a lot of work before you start to write it. A statement of vision, a single line that summarises your entire story. It doesn't need to be high concept, but it does need to be thoroughly considered. Paddy Chayefsky, writer of Network, actually taped his vision statement onto his typewriter like a pair of crosshairs. Do the same and everything you write will be a consistent, conceptual whole. You probably already have a bag of great ideas. Rifle through, get out a pen and paper, write down your very best idea, whatever form it's in, and you're going to develop your vision statement as we go. This process is designed to create a story in miniature by baking 7 key elements of story into your vision statement. Concept, classification, perspective, incitement, conflict, development, and conclusion. Do you ever read any of the books you burn? He laughed. That's against the law. Oh, of course. It's fine work. Monday burn Millet, Wednesday Whitman, Friday Faulkner. Burn 'em to ashes, then burn the ashes. That's our official slogan. They walked still further and the girl said, "Is it true that long ago firemen put fires out instead of going to start them?" "No. Houses have always been fireproof. Take my word for it." "Strange. I heard once that long ago houses used to burn by accident and they needed firemen to stop the flames." He laughed. The idea that started it all, the spark, the pitch, the vision, we all know a great idea when we hear one. But have we ever really asked ourselves, what actually makes a great idea great? At their base level, the great story ideas subvert, satirise or combine cultural iconography. Vampires, for example, have been used to comment on everything from sexuality to corporate greed to race, because those elements are all one aspect of the mythology the audience already understands. How we treat these cultural icons generally happens in one of three ways. Combination, slamming two distinct cultural subjects together, playing on their contrast and commenting on both by opposition to the other. Subversion, taking an icon we all understand and undercutting our expectations of it for either dramatic or comedic effect. Redefinition, applying a distinct lens onto an icon to redefine one thing as another in the effort of meaning, contrast, or message.
The mere treaty is our union. Thou shared thy torch's flame with mine, revealing halls and spires of long-faded empires.
You've probably absorbed this subconsciously, most of us do. Look at your idea and figure out what approach you're tapping into: combination, subversion, or redefinition. Let's have a look at what the vision statement for Fahrenheit 451 would look like at its earliest stage, the purest concept. When literature is outlawed, government forces unearth and burn every last book. It's a great concept. It implies commentary and drama and theme. Now, boil your vision down to its purest form like this. Write it down. It's a great place to start, but it isn't a story yet. What a story needs is classification. This step is where almost all failures fail. Most writers have a great idea, but rarely do they ask, am I using the best genre to develop this idea? Ready. Montag snapped the safety catch on the flamethrower. Fire. A great nuzzling gout of flame leapt out to lap at the books and knock them against the wall. He stepped into the bedroom and fired twice, and the twin beds went up in a great simmering whisper, with more heat and passion and light than he would have supposed them to contain. He burnt the bedroom walls and the cosmetics chest because he wanted to change everything. The chairs, the tables, and in the dining room the silverware and plastic dishes, everything that showed that he had lived here, in this empty house, with a strange woman who would forget him tomorrow, who had gone and quite forgotten him already, listening to a seashell radio pour in on her and in on her as she rode across town, alone. And as before, it was good to burn. He felt himself gush out in the fire, snatch, rend, rip in half with flame, and put away the senseless problem. If there was no solution, well then, now there was no problem either. Fire was best for everything.
Now, genres are story forms, and more importantly, they are the all-stars of the story world. They are story forms that have been told over decades, centuries, and in some cases, like with myth, thousands of years. So they've already been worked out, and they've been worked out very, very great detail, and they know exactly how their characters work, they know what their themes are, they know how the plot is going to work, and so on. So it's very, very tight. When a writer is developing a story idea, right at the beginning of the writing process, they come up against the biggest decision that they will have to make, which is, what genre is this story? The biggest reason that writers fail at the premise, and by the way, 99% of scripts fail at the premise line, right at the very first decision in the writing process. The biggest reason it fails is not that it wasn't a good idea, it's that they used the wrong genre to develop the idea.
Story ideas tend to come with their own associated genres, and the writer often adopts them. But at this stage in the vision statement, a writer should consider every option, even the terrible ones. Here are a few arch genres to get you started. There are obviously plenty of subgenres too, but start here at the broadest sweep. Try and write a pitch for your story using each of these. Which one excites you the most? Can you combine two of them into a single pitch? You'll begin to get a sense of how different genres emphasize different elements of your idea. Which is best? We actually have an example of what happens when you develop the vision statement for Fahrenheit 451 using a couple of different genres. It can be an action movie, or a coming-of-age adventure, or it can even be historical fiction. Each genre underscores different elements of the premise and produces a different result.
Burn it.
What result is elicited is up to the writer, so long as they know their genres. Bradbury could have chosen any one of these. There's no reason he couldn't have explored the same themes in an historical novel, for example. Instead, he chose satirical science fiction. This decision is a big part of why the novel endures as it does, becoming applicable to current and future generations. Let's take a look at his vision statement at the classification stage. In a dystopian future where literature is outlawed, government firemen unearth and burn every last book. Apply the best genre to your vision statement and write it down. At this stage, a subject matter becomes an entire fictional world, but we still have a problem. How will the audience see this incredible world? They crashed the front door and grabbed at a woman. Though she was not running, she was not trying to escape. She was only standing, weaving from side to side, her eyes fixed upon a nothingness in the wall as if they had struck her a terrible blow upon the head. Her tongue was moving in her mouth, and her eyes seemed to be trying to remember something, and then they remembered, and her tongue moved again. Play the man, Master Ridley. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust shall never be put out. Enough of that, said Beatty. Where are they? He slapped her face with amazing objectivity and repeated the question. The old woman's eyes came to a focus upon Beatty. You know where they are, or you wouldn't be here, she said. Perspective. There's only one way for your audience to look through into the fictional world you've created, and that is through character. And I'm talking singular, not plural. Your world may be filled with characters, but the audience will only invest in one, their emotional tour guide. The main character must be complex, of course, but too much so to cram into your vision statement right now. Instead, the hero's most important quality at this stage is their perspective. Ask yourself, who in this world would be the most dramatic to follow? In Fahrenheit 451's opening chapter, a woman is caught with a secret library of illegal books. In the hands of a lesser writer, she would have been the hero. Your first instinct is probably to make your hero someone like you, who represents your values. But the truth is, this leaves nowhere for a main character to go. No one wants a static hero, they need an arc of change. A main character must have the highest possible capacity for change. The further they have to travel on their personal journey, the better, and the more of a journey the reader will have following them. Ray Bradbury made his hero a fireman, Guy Montag, foot soldier of the fascist regime, a villain by any measure. Bradbury knew to choose a main character that had the greatest need and highest potential for change, as well as the closest relationship to his core conflict. Let's revise that vision statement with this perspective in mind. In a dystopian future where literature is outlawed, a government fireman unearths and burns every last book. Take your own vision statement and rewrite it, centering it around your hero. Now we've got a perspective on this world, but it's not a story yet. What we need is for something to happen. Books bombarded his shoulders, his arms, his upturned face. A book alighted almost obediently like a white pigeon in his hands, wings fluttering. In the dim, wavering light, a page hung open. and it was like a snowy feather, the words delicately painted thereon. In all the rush and fervour, Montag had only an instant to read a line, but it blazed in his mind for the next minute, as if stamped there with fiery steel. Time has fallen asleep in the afternoon sunshine. He dropped the book. Immediately, another fell into his arms. Montag's hand closed like a mouth, crushed the book with wild devotion, with an insanity of mindlessness to his chest. The men above were hurling shovelfuls of magazines into the dusty air. They fell like slaughtered birds, and the woman stood below, like a small girl, among the bodies. She opened the fingers of one hand slightly, and in the palm of the hand was a single slender object, an ordinary kitchen match. The sight of it had rushed the men out and down, away from the house, Captain Beatty keeping his dignity, backed slowly through the front door, his pink face burnt and shiny from 1,000 fires and night excitements. God, thought Montag, how true. Always at night the alarm comes, never by day. Is it because the fire is prettier by night? More spectacle, a better show? The pink face of Beatty now showed the faintest panic in the door. The woman's hand twitched on the single matchstick. The fumes of kerosene bloomed up about her. Montag felt the hidden book pound like a heart against his chest. Incitement. You'll probably have heard of the inciting incident, a moment that catapults your hero into their journey, a total upheaval of the world your hero is comfortable with, throwing them into another that they aren't. So, how do you kick things off? Ask yourself, what drastic event could push my character from one world into another? It can't simply be the result of external forces the hero can't control. It's contradictory, but a hero must be both coerced and proactive. The hero needs to be forced into conflict, but he also needs to make a choice. Stories in which our heroes are buffeted about by chance and make no decisions of their own are dull. The best stories have heroes that are forced into a difficult situation and make a choice that has severe consequences. We can see a similar moment in Equilibrium. In a world that suppresses emotion, our hero accidentally smashes the vial containing his emotionally suppressive drug. Chance. The action that incites the narrative is not the accident. It is his decision to not take another dose. Chance pressured him, and he made a decision. Look at the world your hero is comfortable in. Then, the world they're about to be thrown into. Craft a moment that forces them to take their first step over that boundary. This is a point you may have to come back to later. Once you have your central conflict, you can reverse engineer an inciting incident from that. So, how does Bradbury propel his fireman across that threshold? Chance throws a book into his eyeline. He catches a glimpse of the words. Then he makes the choice to steal it and read it. Bradbury solidifies the incident with the most shocking moment yet. The book's owner immolates herself in front of him. The shock and horror of this moment propels our hero forward over that threshold with no chance of turning back. In a dystopian future where literature is outlawed, a government fireman reads a book he is meant to burn. Take your vision statement and rewrite it around your inciting incident. Now we're starting to see a story. What's been assembled so far are the great tools for creating drama, but it hasn't been made yet. Authors full of evil thoughts, lock up your typewriters. Books, so the damned snobbish critics said, were dishwater. But the public, knowing what it wanted, spinning happily, let the comic book survive. There you have it, Montag. It didn't come from the government down. There was no dictum, no declaration, no censorship to start with. No. Technology, mass exploitation, and minority pressure carried the trick. Thank God. White people don't feel good about Uncle Tom's Cabin. Burn it. Someone's written a book on tobacco and cancer of the lungs. The cigarette people are weeping. Burn the book. Serenity, Montague. Peace, Montague. Take your fight outside. Better yet, into the incinerator. Funerals are unhappy and pagan. Eliminate them too. 10 minutes after death, a man's a speck of black dust. Let's not quibble over individuals with memoriams. Forget them. Burn them all. Burn everything. Fire is bright, and fire is clean. Conflict. Conflict is implicit in your premise, but never implies something in a vision statement when you can state it. Your audience won't be reading it, it's for you, so clarity is king. Ask yourself, what conflict does my theme revolve around? A story's conflict is thematic. In Fahrenheit 451, the value of knowledge is in conflict with the suppression of knowledge. This is distilled into the hero and opponent, representing each of these sides. If the hero is railing against something abstract, like the past, for example, then that theme should be represented as a single tangible figure. Even the biggest of themes has to be distilled into an individual character, a single point of dramatic intensity. The nature of conflict is highly malleable. Sometimes they're at war, sometimes they're in love. They can fight openly or secretively. So, how does Ray Bradbury's tyrannical government and its proxy character go from being the hero's ally to his opponent? For Guy Montag, there's one clear state of conflict. He goes on the run. In a dystopian future where literature is outlawed, a fireman goes on the run from the government he works for after reading one of the books he is meant to burn. Frame your vision statement around your core theme and the single opponent that embodies that theme. Now we're getting somewhere, but this line is still just a statement of affairs. The players are in the right positions, but we're sorely lacking the core that every story needs. They rounded a corner in thunder and siren, with concussion of tyres, with a scream of rubber, with a shift of kerosene bulk in the glittery brass tank, like the food in the stomach of a giant, with Montag's fingers jolting off the silver rails, swinging into cold space, with the wind tearing his hair back from his head. I can't do it, he thought. How can I go at this new assignment? How can I go on burning things? I can't go in this place. Beatty, smelling of the wind through which he had rushed, was at Montag's elbow. All right, Montag? The men ran like cripples in their clumsy boots, as quietly as spiders. At last Montag raised his eyes and turned. Beatty was watching his face. Something the matter, Montag? Why? Said Montag slowly. We've stopped in front of my house. Development. Essentially, the character arc. A process of change, a journey that changes your hero forever. The lesson they learn is the message you want your story to impart. Ask yourself the simplest of questions. How does my hero change over the course of the story? The greater distance covered by the hero between who they begin as and who they end as, the better the story will be. They may become better people, they may become worse, but they need to have their innermost flaws challenged in some way. The way in which they change is the most explicit message a writer can broadcast. A fall from grace may serve as a tragic warning of greed. A rise to fame may inspire your audience. Depending on the tone you want to strike, you could warn against tyranny by having your hero crushed beneath it, or your hero can beat the system, but suffer for it.
Thanks for that.
In Fahrenheit 451, Bradbury wants to ultimately end on an optimistic note, turning a cynic into a believer. Fireman Montag is taken on a journey that shows him the value of the written word, ultimately becoming one of the very people he hunted down. In a dystopian future where literature is outlawed, a government fireman goes on the run after reading an illegal book and learns to love the literature he was once tasked with burning. Here we have a world, a character, an incident that sparks a conflict that forces them to change. Think about your hero, how they change, the things they learn. You don't have to map out every beat of their arc at this stage, but you need to know who they are and who they turn into. Reframe your vision statement around this journey of personal growth. After that, there's only one thing left to do. Conclusion. How does my story end? The end of your character's arc isn't an ending. Your arc is a lesson your hero learns, but a true conclusion to your story is an event, a moment in which your characters, your plot, your themes are all resolved. If your hero's arc is a lesson learned, then your conclusion is the final exam. The greatest stories ever told were told by writers who knew where they were going, and having a conclusion in the vision statement only intensifies the drive of a plot. You may think you have a great conclusion, but always take the time to look at it sideways before committing to it. The event you think may resolve your story might just be the beginning. Midnight Express ends with the hero walking out into daylight, despite the fact that its source material continues Billy Hayes' escape for several months.
I have problems because when he wrote Midnight Express, he was an unknown. He had a script called Platoon that he'd written and showed around in Hollywood, and everyone loved the script, but they wouldn't make the movie. Because politically, it was very dangerous. The Vietnam War was too close. I ran through Turkey for 3 days, dyeing my hair and avoiding border guards and swimming across the Maritsa River into Greece. Made for Hollywood.
But in the movie, the moment of escape is the most cathartic resolution. And yet, in Room, our hero's escape is just the end of the first act, and writer Emma Donoghue decides that resolving the trauma of captivity, not the escape from it, is the true resolution. At this point in development, the end resolution can begin to feel obvious to the writer. This is a good sign. The best ideas are obvious once you have them. In Fahrenheit 451, Bradbury slowly builds his theme across the length of the story. The value of historical knowledge, the dangers of illiteracy, the suppression of the mind through suppression of the written word. Ultimately, Fahrenheit 451's resolution teaches us that written text is not what truly matters. It is the knowledge contained within. The hero discovers that the outcast band of book lovers discard and burn the books they've saved, but not before memorizing each one line by line. Here, Bradbury marries plot, character, and theme in a succinct resolution. He imparts his message to us through the pages of a book. In a dystopian future where literature is outlawed, a government fireman goes on the run after reading an illegal book, learning to love the literature he once burned, and discovering a way to preserve it forever. If you've come this far, hopefully you'll have developed a succinct, thematic resolution to your story. Now, your vision statement should be ready to go. This is the line that will serve you throughout all the hard work ahead. Someone struck a match and touched it to a piece of dry paper taken from their pocket, and shoved this under a bit of grass and leaves, and after a while added tiny twigs, which were wet and sputtered, but finally caught. And the fire grew larger in the early morning as the sun came up, and the men slowly turned from looking upriver and were drawn to the fire. "It can't be," said Montague. "It is," replied Granger, smiling. "We're book burners too. We read the books and burnt them, afraid they'd be found. Better to keep it in the old heads, where no one can see it or suspect it. We're all bits and pieces of history, and literature, and international law. Byron, Tom Paine, Machiavelli, or Christ. It's here." Honestly, there's no way to know what Bradbury's vision statement really was for Fahrenheit 451. This is my closest approximation. It's possible he never even needed to write it down. the great writers evolved to the point where they can do this all in their heads. But without doubt, Bradbury had a mission statement that he carefully calibrated before striking a key on his rented typewriter. The sad truth is, bad scripts take just as long to write as good ones. Your vision statement is your story in miniature. As you expand it out into a whole story, its weaknesses will expand too. This is why so many professional writers spend weeks, not days, not hours, but weeks, perfecting their vision statement. Anyone can come up with a good concept, but many assume that's the hard work done. Too many think it should earn them a spot as a working professional, and too few understand that it takes work to make a great idea workable. A vision statement is a contract you make with yourself, a pledge of loyalty to that little spark in your eyes that started it all. And once you've perfected it, the only thing left to do is everything.
They're not willing to put in the time that it takes. They have brilliant ideas, but as I've discussed in other places and in other videos, the most overrated part of the screenplay equation is the idea. Ideas are really pretty useless and worthless. I am one of those people who believes that Breaking Bad is one of the greatest achievements in the history of civilization. I think it's really great drama.
You're goddamn right.
So what's the idea that drives it? A high school chemistry teacher gets a cancer diagnosis, and so he decides to go into the methamphetamine trade with an incorrigible former student of his, a criminal, to sell drugs to support his family. That is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Many companies shot that down. And yet it is this triumphant achievement, 62 hours of a TV series, every frame of which is engaging. And so how did that happen? And the answer is they told a good story. It's where the story, it's really all about story. That's what we believe at UCLA. That's what I believe. And again, I think it just demonstrates the value of story and the valuelessness of ideas. And I think that very young people are more into ideas. They have great ideas. I like to say, when you have a great idea, if you have a really, really great idea for a screenplay, that's all you've got. I mean, what remains after that? Everything. The characters have to be invented, the dialogue they speak, and it has to be worth listening to all for itself, just because there's something kind of charming about it. But beyond that, it can't be just for itself. It also has to advance the story in a palpable, measurable, identifiable way. Likewise, expand the audience's appreciation of the characters. It takes time. For me to give you an idea about a movie, it takes a handful of seconds. To walk you through the story of the movie, it takes the length of the movie, a couple of hours. So that's where the value is.
Just when I think I'm winning, when I've broken every door, the ghosts of my life are wilder than before. Just when I thought I could not be stopped, when my chance came to be king, the ghosts of my life are wilder than the